Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR, a weekly podcast where we explore the forces shaping our roles today, from new technologies, shifting expectations to tightening budgets. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Before we get going, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Instant Impact, for supporting this episode. Instant Impact happens to be my company, and we're making world-class talent acquisition a reality for SMEs by providing a range of embedded talent solutions, from full recruitment outsourcing to workforce planning and other advisory services. If you're in HR and you're overwhelmed with the sheer volume or complexity of recruitment challenge, then please do get in touch. Visit instant-impact.com, where you'll be able to book in a call. Just specify that you've come in through the podcast, and I'll personally jump on a call to talk through your talent acquisition strategy headaches. Now, on with the show. For the first time in modern history, there are 5 generations in the workforce. And whether we're talking about the career-obsessed boomers or entitled snowflake millennials like me, there's an unhelpful misconception about all of us. There is, however, a kernel of truth at the heart of the matter. Those joining the workforce today expect very different things from their careers to their parents or grandparents. It's a fascinating topic that we get to explore today with my guest, Rachel Ramsay. Rachel is the People and Culture Director of BCB Group, a crypto scale-up working at the intersection of disruptive technology and traditional financial organizations, the old and the new. Very suitable for today's conversation. Before BCB, Rachel worked at another fintech scale-up, Finova, and before jumping into the chaos of small companies, worked for years at Aon. Rachel, welcome to We Need to Talk About HR.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I always like to start in the same way. How did you end up in this crazy old world we call HR?
It's a question I ask myself a lot. How did I get here? So I've always been fascinated about people, how they interact with each other, how they work, how they live. So when I discovered that a family friend worked in HR, I was like, oh, this could be something interesting, something I want to explore. So all the way back in sixth form, I did my week of work experience at Aon, where I then started working after I graduated from Loughborough University. So started back then in work experience, and then joined as a HR administrator, supporting business partners, kind of getting a sort of an opportunity to shadow, observe what they do, and then took that experience into the wonderful world of fintech, which is where I am now.
That's so cool. So full career in HR, on purpose as well, it sounds, which I think is pretty rare, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's not something I've stumbled into like a lot of people do, or kind of I've not got the recruitment experience as well that a lot of people come into HR with. So yeah, just tried to learn it from scratch, and here we are, still loving it.
That's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about Aon, because until a couple of years ago, I had thought it was purely an insurance company, but under the surface, does some really interesting things in the HR space. What kind of HR environment were you in that kind of company? Yeah,
sure. So yeah, Aon was, when I was there, it was about 55,000 people globally. So it was a huge company. And I was in the shared services department. So I was HR, supporting the insurance broking sector. There was reinsurance, insurance, pensions, consulting. There was loads. It was so big that you kind of can't even quantify it. But there was the consultants provided kind of learning and development opportunities to people. They supported externally. But yeah, I was in the, as I say, shared services, which was very much there was centres of excellence. So we had our employee relations experts. We had a dedicated person for maternity leave. There was so many departments there. And I was in that HR business partnering space.
So really similar to the kind of environment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've got a maternity expert. When I didn't quite realise what the jump would be into small company. I was so used to having always somebody to turn to go, you're the expert in this. What does that mean? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's just me. I've got to figure out kind of what this means. So it was a learning curve, but one that I was so ready for, and kind of put all of that learning from Aon. I think where you go from a big company where they have got established processes in place and everybody knows you've got a handbook to turn to then going, we've just got to figure this out. There's a real, it's really helpful having that big company experience in that situation.
That's interesting, because you'd think it'd be in some ways detrimental. And I've definitely met people who have been trained in big company, big process. There's a way of doing everything. There's the insert enterprise name way of dealing with this kind of issue. And I think sometimes, a lot of people really struggle to get out of that institutionalized mindset and take a more elastic approach to.
Yeah, I think it's a personality thing. You've got to be willing to be quite flexible, especially when that move to sort of smaller company. But I know for a fact, if I hadn't had that experience at Aon supporting those business partners and seeing how they kind of dealt with situations, I wouldn't have been set up for being able to then implement my own processes in the smaller companies that I've gone to. Because what do you compare it to? You go onto Google or whatever website you choose, there's so much advice out there. You're like, who do I listen to? So I think having that, even as a point of reference, like there's never a 100% right way of doing things unless you're talking about the law, but having that point of reference to go, okay, that's how they did it. Even if you're dealing with like performance issues or a performance review process, having that as a starting point, I've found so helpful.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think even if it's just to decide what not to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's definitely where I've learned a lot.
So you've moved from that HR environment to BCB, where I know at the moment you've got over 100 colleagues all over the world. What's sort of South Africa, UK, Luxembourg, a couple more in there as well. And there are two of you in the HR function, which means I would imagine you have to be slightly expert at an awful lot of things. How do you square that off?
It's difficult sometimes. I'm very lucky with the one person I do have on my team, and I would say it's maybe quite cliche, but it's definitely true in a small company, and it's definitely true of BCB. We're not just our team. Like we work so closely with the finance team. So when it comes to things like payroll, I am not a payroll expert and I'm not a finance expert, but I've got the support of that team. So I don't ever feel as though I'm on my own. We're very lucky to have a culture where you do ask the questions. So I don't ever feel as though I've got to know something. So even if recently one of the issues, something I was dealing with was Swiss tax, and I'm like, what?
You don't know about Swiss tax?
Yeah, I know. It's something we should all know, right? But I didn't feel as though I had to know it all. Thank the Lord, because I would have no idea where to start. So we're definitely not on our own. And we hold our hands up and we're like, look, we don't know everything and we can't be expected to. But we're in an environment where we call it out and we discuss it. And I do work with some incredibly intelligent people who have a huge amount of experience from the large corporates through to the scale-ups again. So they can bring in what they know, which is super helpful. So yeah, I ask a lot of silly questions is the short answer.
Well, what a good time to move on to the people that you work with
go.
and all of their experience. Not scripted, I promise. So you're in a relatively small business.
Yeah.
But it's complex and it's multinational.
Yeah.
And you've got people from a really wide range of different generations. Yeah. Particularly on that last point, what are the sort of what are the trends? What are the challenges that you're seeing today?
I think this is something that you don't really realize how big of an impact it has until you properly look at the spread of people. So I think our youngest employee is 22 and our oldest is nearly 60. Those two people couldn't be further apart, and they will interact on a daily basis. I think the challenges we're seeing, one of them is hybrid working, which is a massive debate, as we've spoken about. We've got people who are so used to being, or pre-COVID, it's definitely that COVID split is a real kind of point in the road for so many things. people who were so used to being in the office 5 days a week with no questions asked, that Friday morning hangover, you're like, well, I've just got to suck it up and be in the office. And then you've got people who started working during COVID and have never known any different. And there's no right or wrong answer to either of those. You've got a group of people who are trying to convince a younger generation that there is a real importance to being in the office and learning from people, versus people going, but I've never been in and I've still learned and I've still progressed, so why do I need to? So getting that balance right is that's one big struggle. And I think the development opportunities is the other really big one for me. So historically, tenure kind of defined how, when you got promoted and when you got a pay rise. Now we've got a group of people, a generation of people going, but I've shown you I can do it, so reward me for it. And I can see both sides. I've always got a kind of, there's no right answer in either. No one's got the right answer, and we've all got to learn from each other and try and figure it out together.
So here's a point, and I think I'd really like to zero in on the working style, the hybrid remote in office, because I think it's something that we're all struggling with at the moment. But maybe there is no right answer, but you need an answer.
Yeah.
So how do you progress when you've got a bunch of people on one side saying it's great to be in the office 5 days a week, that's what I want to do, and I want that everyone to do that, and they're probably the most senior people, and you've got a bunch of other people who are saying, nope, we're working from home, I like to have shorts on under the Teams link and a shirt on top. From an HR perspective, how do you navigate that? Because it's a really interesting, you can only have one answer.
Yeah. I think for me, it's the why behind either option. So why is it important for people to come into the office? CEO, and this isn't our CEO, to be clear, he understands the flexibility. Why do you want people to come in? Because if you're just getting people to come in to sit on a Zoom call all day, then of course they're not going to agree with it. So I think there needs to be a shift in what are your reasons for asking people to come in, and what benefit are they going to see from it? And it's not just about office snacks, because people have snacks in their kitchen at home. Like, that's not enough anymore. So I think you've got to give people a reason, whether that's company-wide town hall where you will sit and speak to the CEO or the rest of the C-suite, and you actually have that interaction with them. And we're going to do team interactions where you're going to speak to different people from another team that you might not always interact with. And what is that going to do? What are you going to get out of that? Because I think when you go back to just, we're all just going to sit and be on the same calls that we would be on anyway, then no one can see the value in that. The struggle we've got is there's always going to be an element of remote activity, because our next biggest office is in Johannesburg. And unfortunately, flights to Johannesburg are super expensive. So we can't just fly everybody over every week or every month, which would be lovely to do, but it's just not feasible.
It's really interesting. I like the point that you make around dialogue, and I think there's really not enough going on at the moment. I think it's a big problem. And I think that if you're looking at those of HR policies, of ways of working, future of the workforce stuff, that's the technical term. I do think that if you're able to take the business, like really distill down the business objectives from leadership, sort of transform that into a host of different people strategies, really closely linked to the business outcomes, and then put a layer on of communications to the rest of the organization. I think from my experience, and I think there's actually a previous guest of mine, Ria Mitchell, talked about this really, really well. It feels like that level of transparency and communications goes a long way. And I think just to tie it to another point that I know we're keen to get onto today, if you look at training and learning and development, if you're able to say from the C-level, look, we need the best people in the industry, in your organization, we're regulated, we need a certain level of competency within the organization, we've hired amazing people throughout the organization, but we've hired people with loads of experience for a reason, and we wanted that experience to rub off on the rest of the organization. And studies have shown that it's really powerful to do that, sort of get some of that through osmosis, as well as having structured training.
Yeah.
That message goes really nicely. Whereas I think, you look at the Goldman Sachs announcement, I can't remember how long ago it was now, it was about a year, where the CEO just goes, right, working from home is, I quote, an abomination.
Yeah.
I want everyone in 5 days a week. There's no logic.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Communication is such a big thing. We've actually got, we call them our shadow board, and they're essentially a group of people at the more junior end of the organisation who are sort of high potential. They put themselves forward for this group and they go through a kind of interview process essentially. And the intention is that they bridge the gap between Exco and the junior level of the company. And we've just recently tasked them, working with them to look at communication as a whole across the company, because you've got this layer at the top who think they're really good at talking about things, and they're like, but is it not clear? Is this like what's not getting across of kind of strategy or any sort of communication? It can go from something really small to like your bigger business objectives. So we've asked our shadow board to start looking at what needs to be improved on communication, what will resonate with all of you, what will the rest of the company listen to. And I think when we've nailed that, when they nail it, because it will be them that do it, then I hope to see a big improvement, and that will bring in the kind of hybrid working debate, and it will bring in, we do an 8:45 call every day, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Does that still work? Like, what are all these communication styles that we use? We've got Slack, we've got WhatsApp, you've got email, you've got so many different ways of speaking to each other. But something needs to change to get messages across and get people working together. So we'll see what they come up with. I'll share it. I'll let you know.
That is so cool. And aside from the name, which I mean, it sounds
I can't take
sounds like it's from a Marvel comic or something like that. Just could you just tell me a little bit more about the shadow board?
Yeah, of course.
How long it's been going?
Yeah, it was set up. I think it was just as I joined, so coming up to 2 years ago. And kind of, I've seen it in larger organisations as well. It's essentially kind of seen as your next generation of leaders almost. So the intention is they learn from our Exco and SLT because they're getting a bit of mentorship from them. They're seeing the conversations they have. They're getting exposure by presenting to that group of people that they never usually would. They are our touch point with the junior level of the organisation. So even though we're very small and I speak to people daily, I'm kind of always in conversation with people at all levels of the company, but you always kind of worry that there's maybe people aren't always being as transparent as they would be with people that they trust and are at the same level as. So that was the idea of it was, you give these people development opportunities and they can also open our eyes to things that we're maybe not seeing. And it's worked really well. We've gone through kind of 3 rotations of it now. So people are on the board for sort of 6 to 9 months. They get that experience. They drive through a project, whether it's a wellbeing related project or it's something more strategic. They see that through to the end and then they hand over to another group.
You know what I think is really cool? I think a lot of it's really cool, but one of the things I think is really cool from an HR perspective is it probably frees you up from being the sort of like union leader. I think that role that HR sometimes plays is really harmful to the relationship with the Exco, with the board.
Yeah.
So probably having that new channel for concerns that's not through you, I bet that helps.
Definitely, because and also with communicating to the rest of the company as well, because unfortunately for us HR people, there's still a thing of, it's a HR initiative, or HR are telling us to. When it comes from a group of people who have got this feedback themselves, or they've explained why this is a problem or this is something we should be looking at, it is listened to in a different way. Just naturally, I think that is just, it's kind of a subconscious thing that people are like, it's come from them, that they they live it day to day. This isn't just
it's an us
Rachel's decided that we need to do this. So yeah, it does change it, and it's definitely helpful. And they've got some great ideas. They impress me all the time with the things they come up with and the way they approach things. So it's super helpful.
That's really interesting. So back to multi-generational workforces.
Yeah.
Not that that's not, but so I think one of the interesting dynamics is that you often, I'm going to bring my massive paintbrush out and put some big broad brush strokes, but often you have a board or an exco of one. Actually, you probably have a board of one generation, an exco of another, and then people leadership of yet another, and then the rest of the organization that sits as well. So have you noticed any differences, any of the generational differences between yourself and your exco coming into play?
Yes, I would say it's hard to tell whether it's because I come at things from a people perspective and they don't, that's not necessarily their first approach, or whether it's a generational thing. There's definitely, and I've seen this in a few places, people referring to age. I've started to notice that more. I think as you start to get people like myself who are younger, moving into more senior roles, there's definitely comments made like, oh gosh, you're so young, or wow, you've got here quickly, sort of thing. And I have a bit of imposter syndrome about that. Kind of, oh God, they've got like 20 years more experience than I do. Am I okay to be kind of challenging them on this? And I think that's something I see with a lot of people in kind of the millennial generation. They're very ambitious. Again, we're talking really generally and going for the stereotypes here, but let's just do it. They are ambitious. They are pushing for those promotions, and you're seeing a lot more people of that age on kind of a senior leadership team sat right next to people who have got a real wealth of experience. So I think it's when it's references to like, oh, I've got 20 years experience, or oh, back in the good old days, it's those little things that I've started to pick up on. Have I noticed differences in approaches? Yes, but not to the point that it's kind of an issue, I would say. I think the biggest one goes back to that hybrid working, is kind of, people just don't get the kind of the value of being in the office. That's really where we have that sticking point between generations, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it sounds like from today and from, conversations that we've had in the past, you are at quite a forward-thinking organization.
Yeah.
And you do have a leadership team that takes in opinions from other perspectives.
Definitely.
But there's definitely, I've seen, and I'm definitely not talking about our clients here who are very much of that kind of organization, but there are other organizations where it is a bit more command and control.
Yeah.
Right. And I think maybe that's probably where you start to feel it a bit more.
Definitely. I think
sharply.
When you're in a crypto company where we have to be forward thinking, we've got people who are looking forward all the time and kind of looking at new tech and everything else. So they do come at things from a different perspective, which I think makes my life a lot easier.
Let's talk training. Small, ambitious, transformational company.
Yeah.
I'd imagine you're not swimming in L&D budget right now.
No.
For me, it kind of comes back to the hybrid point, but it definitely, there's definitely, I think, a difference in generations when it comes to their approach to learning. So I think a lot of the, Gen Z, millennials, very comfortable with self-serve, figure out on YouTube kind of learning. There's a whole danger set there. Whereas people who are more, and this might be an experience thing rather than a generational point, but much more comfortable with structured learning, accreditations, etc.
Yeah.
What are you putting in place at BCB, which is both budget friendly and multi-generational?
We've really kind of encouraged people to own their own development. That's our biggest kind of, I guess, point at the moment is your career is your career. You can't rely on your manager to go find opportunities for you or find things for you to learn. A, because they don't have the time, and B, they don't know what you want to learn. Only you do know that. So we're doing like through our self-reflection periods, and then we're just going through kind of goal setting, encouraging people to really own their own development plan. What do I want to do, whether that's over the next 6 months, 9 months, 5 years. So that ownership is really important, and taking the accountability for that, because you can't, if you get to the end of the year and go, oh, well, I've not been given a promotion, or I've not moved into that job that I wanted. It's like, well, did you tell anybody? Did you talk about it? Because if you didn't, you can't expect people to be able to support with that.
So how does that work in the business? Because I think especially people early in their career, they're not going to be able, they don't know what roles could exist as the business grows.
So it's still very new. Like, just to be clear, we're figuring it out, like as we do with a number of things. But we're very lucky that where it is so small, people hear what's going on quite easily. They know what people are working on. Our teams interact constantly. Like, our Slack channels are so busy all the time with people sharing things, interacting, needing to pull on someone else's experience. Someone who's been there since the beginning will just know something and how it works. So that helps. We have made a real conscious effort with advertising our roles internally now. So where we would usually put a role out on LinkedIn or on the website, and no one internally would, if they didn't see it, they wouldn't even know it existed. We're making a conscious effort to advertise everything internally. It all goes on Slack. It gets spoken about on a call. People are open to even just saying, oh, I'm interested in that role. How does that work? They can speak to the manager. Encouraging that internal mobility is something that we have seen work really well, because then, to your point, people do get to see what other teams are doing. They can move around. It's not always super straightforward, because then you leave a gap in another team. But where we are small, we can be more flexible with that. So allowing people the chance to do a secondment in another team, and if it doesn't work out, they go back to their old team, is really helpful, because they do figure out kind of, okay, what does a role look like there that they've never even considered before. It's
really interesting, and it goes back, I think, to the communication point from the Exco. It's something we do with some of our clients, which I love, is we work with the Exco to understand what the whatever they can give us, 1 to 3 year business plan is. We then map out the roles that are definitely going to exist along that journey, and it's not necessarily. It's very rarely the roles are open right now, because they're really easy to do. But to get to this size, we're going to need these roles. And then also we map out, even if they don't know the roles, they often know what the skills gaps are.
Yes.
So we're going to have a compliance gap here. We're going to have a leadership gap here. The industry is tending towards AI, for example. We're going to have an AI gap in the organization. If you can share that back with the company, and you have that culture of self-service development, then actually you can start really developing your team in a way that's conducive to company growth. And you find that 6 months, 9 months after starting this, you've got a role that you think is going to be really hard to recruit for. Suddenly you've got Jenny in accounting who's been learning French because she knows that you're going to launch in France, and that's huge. I think that's where it all really starts to gel together.
Yeah, and you've got to, that culture has to be true. It's not something you can just kind of speak to and give it lip service. Like, it has to be really rich and ingrained in what people know. It is actually, the opportunities are there. So yeah, and that's, to bring it back to the multi-generational thing, the younger generation definitely are more open to that, and they appreciate those opportunities because they're not as, I don't know if loyal is the right word to a role, but people are definitely less loyal to companies now. Like, you look at the boomer generation, they stuck in a job for 20 odd years. They didn't, even if they weren't happy, they would just be like, but I'm here, I have to stick at it. And that fluidity is definitely more, it's in a company perspective in the younger generations, but it's also in a role perspective. They're not, okay, they might have been in HR, but they're like, oh, but I actually really love what the customer success team do, and I've got some transferable skills. So yeah, why don't I go, and even open to taking a pay cut, which I'm seeing more is people happy to go to do the job that is going to make me happy. I'm willing to, maybe if it's not super drastic, but, you know, people are more open to going, no, I'm going to go retrain and do something completely different, which I think is super interesting and not something we've seen before.
That's so interesting. I love that you use the happiness word.
Yeah.
I think it's going to really come into that concept of happiness in the workplace. Of course, we've had well-being's.
Yeah.
That's well established now. I
Yeah.
think we're going to start thinking about it, about happiness. And I'm seeing, this is anecdotal, but I'm definitely seeing people ranking their happiness in work above career progression, development, salary.
Definitely.
Or some people, I think that's going to be a really interesting trend.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be really hard to manage because we all have bad days at work, right? You all have a day that's really stressful, or you're dealing with something that you would rather not be dealing with, like Swiss tax, but we just get on with it. But it's that balance. And I think when that balance starts to tip to being more unhappy, we're definitely going to start seeing people across all industries. I don't think this is, it's not applicable just to one place. This is everywhere. They're just going to go, do you know what? I'm not going to put up with it, and I'm not going to do that anymore. So luckily, touch wood, we haven't seen that. And I think people are pretty happy at BCB, which is great. But yeah, I think people are starting to put more emphasis on it for sure.
Good BCB plug.
Yeah, there we go. We're all so happy.
Well, I'm afraid that's pretty much all we've got time for today, apart from my favourite last question, which is, what advice would you give someone joining HR today?
I would encourage people to get into HR. I think it's an overlooked industry a lot of the time. Advice I would give is be hungry, ask all the questions. Don't be afraid to question why something's been done. Just because it's an ingrained process or it's the way that it's always been done, figure out why, figure out if there's a better way of doing it. And don't think that you're just a service provider. There is so much more that HR can offer. And if you're working with the right leadership team who values that, unfortunately, there's still leadership teams who don't, then you will succeed and you'll love it and you can offer a load of value to a company. But don't be afraid to question what's being done, because I think a lot of the time HR feel as though we've just got to be the doers behind the scenes and don't kind of question it because it's not our area of expertise. But I think we've got a lot of transferable skills and we should shout about it.
Yeah, ask the tough questions.
Exactly.
Break things down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. I absolutely loved this conversation.
Thank you.